Consider, if you will, what it means to be born into a world where knowledge itself is contraband, where the simple act of teaching a girl to understand chemistry could mean death, where speaking your own language in your own home invites imprisonment. This is not ancient history. This is 1867 in the heart of Europe, in a city called Warsaw. Into this world comes a child, Maria Sklodowska. Her first breath drawn in a nation that doesn't legally exist. Her first words spoken in a language the Russian Empire has declared illegal. And yet, from this impossible beginning, from these frozen streets where revolution simmers beneath every word, will emerge a discovery so profound it will reshape our understanding of matter itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Sklodowski apartment sits on Freta Street, cramped rooms that smell perpetually of boiled cabbage and carbolic acid. Maria's father, Vladislav, teaches physics and mathematics at a Russian gymnasium, but his real education happens in whispers. On hidden chalkboards behind false walls, he sketches molecular structures. In desk drawers lined with false bottoms, he stores forbidden Polish textbooks. The periodic table exists in his home only as a contraband poem his children memorize before bed. Each element's properties learned like verses of resistance. You must understand what it meant to teach science under Russian occupation. The Tsar's inspectors arrived without warning, searching for any evidence of Polish instruction. Laboratory equipment disappeared overnight, confiscated as tools of sedition. Vladislav's own glassware, his precious beakers and retorts collected over decades, vanished in 1873 when Maria was 6 years old. The inspectors claimed they could be used to manufacture explosives. In truth, they simply couldn't tolerate the idea of Poles understanding the material world. So Vladislav learned to teach without instruments. He drew chemical reactions in the air with his fingers. He used kitchen salt and cooking pans to demonstrate crystallization. He transformed poverty into pedagogy, making his children see that science lived not in expensive apparatus, but in the questions you asked about how things work. Maria watched solutions precipitate in teacups. She observed oxidation on dinner knives. Every object became a lesson, every moment an opportunity to understand the invisible forces governing existence. Her mother, Bronislawa, directed a private girls' school, but tuberculosis had already begun its patient work in her lungs. The disease was everywhere in Warsaw's winter. The cold that seeped through walls, the damp that never quite dried, the coal smoke that turned snow grey within hours of falling. Maria watched her mother grow thinner each year, watched her struggle for breath after climbing a single flight of stairs, watched her try to hide the handkerchief spotted with blood. Bronislawa died when Maria was 10 years old. The apartment filled with mourners, speaking in hushed Russian, the language of occupation even at funerals. Maria stood beside the coffin, dry-eyed, memorizing the prayers in Polish that couldn't be spoken aloud. Later, in the room she shared with her sisters, she would recite atomic weights in the darkness. Hydrogen 1, carbon 12, oxygen 16, each number a small act of defiance against the void that had swallowed her mother. The winters grew harder. With Bronislawa's income gone, the family burned furniture for warmth. First the spare chairs, then the decorative side tables, finally the bookshelf that once held Polish poetry. Maria studied by candlelight, her breath visible in the frozen air, her fingers so cold she could barely hold her pencil. But she could hold the periodic table in her mind, perfect and complete, a structure more permanent than any building, more lasting than empire. You see, this is what occupation does. It doesn't just control your movements or dictate your words. It tries to control what you're allowed to know. In Russian-controlled Warsaw, girls could attend school, but only to learn embroidery and French. Science was for boys. University was for boys. The empire had decided that half its population didn't need to understand how the universe worked. But in the apartments of Warsaw, revolution simmered quietly. The Flying University, they called it. an underground network of scholars teaching forbidden subjects in secret locations that changed every few nights. Classes met in attics, in basements, in back rooms of sympathetic shops. Always after dark, always with lookouts posted, always ready to scatter if the police arrived. Maria, first attended at 17, led through dark streets by her sister Bronya. The lesson that night covered human anatomy, taught by a doctor who had been dismissed from the university for refusing to lecture in Russian. 20 young women crowded into a room designed for 6, their bodies pressed together for warmth and concealment. The doctor passed around diagrams drawn on rice paper that could be quickly swallowed if necessary. He spoke in rapid, urgent Polish about the circulatory system, about the heart's chambers, about the blood that carried life to every cell. For Maria, touching actual laboratory glassware for the first time was like discovering she had a new sense. The weight of a beaker in her hand, the smooth curve of a retort, the delicate precision of a pipette. These were not drawings on hidden chalkboards. These were real instruments, tools for interrogating nature, devices for revealing truth. Her hands trembled, not from cold this time, but from the understanding that these simple glass objects represented freedom, the freedom to question, the freedom to discover, the freedom to know. She attended every session she could after that. Chemistry in a widow's parlor, biology in a bookbinder's workshop, physics in a miller's loft where flour dust hung in the air like snow. Each lesson was a risk. Siberian exile for the teachers, prison for the students. But knowledge, once tasted, becomes its own justification. These young women weren't just learning science. They were proving that women could learn science, that no empire could police thought itself. The raid came on a February night in 1885. Maria was conducting a spectroscopy experiment, examining the light signatures of different elements when the pounding started on the door downstairs. The instructor froze mid-sentence. Everyone knew what that sound meant. Russian police. 3 floors below, but climbing fast, the room erupted into controlled chaos. Papers swept into the stove. Chemicals poured down the sink. Glassware hidden under floorboards. Maria grabbed the spectroscope, the most incriminating piece of equipment, too valuable to destroy. Where could she hide it? The police would search every drawer, every cupboard. Her eyes met her sister Bronya's across the room. Without speaking, Bronya snatched the attendance list from the instructor's desk and swallowed it. Just thrust the paper into her mouth and swallowed, despite the ink, despite the acid used to fix the writing. Maria watched her sister's throat work, saw her eyes water from the chemical burn, saw her force down every scrap of paper that could identify the 40 students present. Maria shoved the spectroscope under her skirts, the cold metal against her thigh, and stood perfectly still as the police burst through the door. They found an apartment full of young women having tea. Nothing more. Teacups hastily distributed. Idle conversation about fashion and weather. The officers searched for 2 hours, ripping up floorboards, emptying drawers, but found nothing. Because these women had learned to make evidence disappear faster than brass could burn. Because they understood that some knowledge was worth bleeding for. After the police left, Bronya vomited blood into a basin. The acid from the ink had burned her throat and esophagus. She would carry scars there for the rest of her life. A permanent reminder of what it cost to protect the simple right to learn. Maria walked home through the frozen streets, carrying a spectroscope under her dress, understanding with absolute clarity that this was her purpose. Not to submit. Not to accept limitations, but to learn everything she could about the physical world, no matter the cost. Because the Russian Empire could confiscate equipment and ban Polish instruction and declare science off-limits to women. But they couldn't reach inside her mind, couldn't erase what she'd already learned, couldn't unthink thoughts once thought. In her room that night, she took out the spectroscope and examined it by candlelight. A brass tube with glass prisms, simple enough. But pointed at a flame, it revealed something miraculous. The light separated into distinct lines, each element producing its own unique signature. Sodium's yellow pair, hydrogen's red line. Evidence that matter itself spoke in color, if only you knew how to listen. Imagine understanding that the universe has a vocabulary. that every element announces itself in light, that nature isn't chaos but code, waiting to be deciphered. Maria held that spectroscope like a key to a door she couldn't yet see. Somewhere beyond Russian occupation, beyond Warsaw's frozen streets, beyond the limitations imposed on her sex, there existed laboratories where questions could be asked openly. Where discovery wasn't contraband, she would find those laboratories. She would ask those questions. She would decipher that code. But first, she would need to survive long enough to escape. The train to Paris takes 40 hours if everything goes according to plan. Marie Sklodowska, she still uses her Polish name, will use it for 3 more years, boards at Warsaw's Vistula station on a November morning in 1891. Her ticket is 4th class, which means wooden benches and no heat. Her luggage consists of 1 small trunk containing 2 dresses, 3 textbooks, and a bedsheet she'll use as a blanket for the next 3 years, hidden in her corset. Folded into squares no larger than postage stamps are her traveling papers. Forged, of course. Official documents declaring her a governess traveling to care for a French family's children. The forgery cost her 6 months of wages saved from her actual work as a governess, tutoring the children of wealthy families who wanted their sons prepared for university and their daughters prepared for marriage. She taught the boys science. She taught the girls science too when their parents weren't watching. The train crosses 3 borders, Russian Poland into German Prussia, Prussia into the German Empire proper, Germany into France. At each crossing, soldiers board to check papers. Marie keeps her hands folded in her lap, her face composed, her breathing steady. The papers hidden against her ribs could mean prison, could mean deportation back to Russian-controlled territory, could mean the end of everything before it begins. But the soldiers see a plain young woman in a shabby coat, obviously poor, obviously no threat. They wave her through without a second glance. This is perhaps the first time in her life that being underestimated works in her favor. It will not be the last. Paris reveals itself slowly through the train window as dawn breaks over the industrial outskirts. Factory chimneys, workers' tenements. Then gradually the neighborhoods improve, buildings growing taller and more ornate, until finally the train slides into Gare du Nord, and Marie steps onto French soil with 20 francs in her pocket. 20 francs. Let me give you some perspective on what that means. A decent meal in Paris costs 1 franc 50 centimes. A month's rent in a proper apartment costs 80 francs. Marie has enough money for 3 weeks of bread if she eats once daily. After that, she'll need to find work or starve. These are the terms of her freedom. She navigates Paris with a street map she memorized from a borrowed atlas back in Warsaw. The Latin Quarter sprawls across the left bank, a maze of narrow streets climbing toward the Pantheon. This is where students live, where rents are cheapest, where you can survive on determination and stolen library heat. Marie finds a room on Rue Flatter, 6th floor, no elevator. The landlady, a widow who smells of boiled beef and suspicion, demands first month's rent in advance. 40 francs. The room is barely larger than a closet. 1 narrow bed, 1 chair, 1 table beneath a skylight that leaks when it rains. No heat except what rises through the floorboards from apartments below. But it has something more valuable than comfort. It has proximity to the Sorbonne, to the lecture halls where she can finally, legally, openly study science without hiding spectroscopes under her skirts. She enrolls at the Faculty of Sciences with the last of her money. The registrar looks at her application with barely concealed confusion. Mathematics and physics, she's requested. Not literature, not languages, the hard sciences. He asks if she's certain. She is certain. He shrugs and processes her enrollment. Marie Sklodowska becomes one of 23 women among 1,800 male students in the Faculty of Sciences. That first winter, she learns what cold truly means. Warsaw was cold, yes, but Warsaw had family, had shared body heat, had kitchens where something was always cooking. Paris, in her 6th floor garret, is a different species of cold entirely. The water in her wash basin freezes solid every night from November through March. She wakes with frost on her pillow from her own breath. Her fingers grow so numb she can barely hold her pencil during morning lectures. She discovers that tea bags can be reused 7 times before losing all color. That one baguette can be stretched across 3 days if you eat the soft center first and save the hard crust for when hunger becomes unbearable. That standing near the radiators in the Sorbonne Library can add precious minutes to the time before you start shivering. That fainting from hunger in a lecture hall is embarrassing, but fainting from hunger during an examination is catastrophic. She faints during a physics examination in the spring of 1892, simply blacks out between one equation and the next, her pencil rolling across the floor. She wakes to find the proctor standing over her with a glass of water and an expression of stern disapproval. He assumes she's been out drinking the night before, or perhaps starving herself for fashion. The truth that she's eaten nothing but half a bag of radishes in 3 days doesn't occur to him. She completes the examination anyway. Scores, first among all 1,800 students in the faculty. The proctor who revived her later learns her name from the posted results and remembers the girl who fainted. And for years afterward, he'll tell the story of the Polish student so dedicated she took examinations while unconscious. But you have to understand, this isn't dedication in some abstract sense. This is survival mathematics. Marie came to Paris with nothing. No family money, no patron, no connections. Only her ability to learn faster and work harder than everyone around her. If she fails, she returns to Warsaw, returns to Russian occupation, returns to teaching French verbs to girls who aren't allowed to understand chemistry. Failure isn't an option because failure means the death of every possibility. So she lives on 2 pounds of chocolate and a bag of radishes per week. Chocolate because it's dense calories for minimal cost. Radishes because they're the cheapest vegetable at the market, especially the ones starting to go soft that vendors sell for pennies. She eats this diet for months. Her gums begin to bleed from scurvy. Her hair grows brittle and breaks. Her menstruation stops entirely. Her body too starved to maintain functions beyond basic survival. She doesn't care. Or rather, she cares about something more than physical comfort. Every lecture she attends is a revelation. Every experiment she observes is a miracle. She spent her entire life sneaking glances at science through keyholes. Now she's in the room where it happens, watching professors demonstrate principles she'd only read about in smuggled textbooks. The wave nature of light, the laws of thermodynamics, the mathematics of electromagnetic fields. In the spring of 1894, she meets Pierre Curie. The meeting happens in the laboratory of a mutual acquaintance, a physicist who thinks these two might find common ground in their work on magnetism. Pierre is 35, a brilliant researcher who's never quite fit into academic social structures. He's turned down multiple prestigious positions because they came with administrative duties that would interfere with his experiments. He lives with his parents. He's never married, much to his mother's despair. He's devoted his life to understanding how magnetic fields affect crystalline structures. Work considered too esoteric to be properly important. Marie arrives for the meeting wearing every piece of clothing she owns. Not for warmth, though that's a factor, but because she has nowhere else to store them. 2 dresses layered over each other. 2 pairs of stockings. A coat with torn lining. She looks like a rag picker. Pierre sees someone whose laboratory notebooks contain calculations of extraordinary precision. They talk for 3 hours about the magnetic properties of different steels, about how temperature affects magnetization, about the equipment needed to measure these effects with accuracy. Pierre mentions some apparatus he has in his laboratory at the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry. Marie mentions she's been trying to replicate certain experiments but lacks proper instruments. Pierre says he could lend her some equipment, just temporarily, so she could verify her results. This is how their courtship begins. Not with flowers or poetry, with the loan of a sensitive magnetometer and some carefully calibrated temperature probes. Pierre starts accidentally, leaving equipment at the laboratory Marie shares with several other students. A better balance. More precise thermometers. Once inexplicably, an entire box of good quality notebook paper, which costs money Marie doesn't have. He invites her to his parents' house for dinner. She accepts, mostly because it means a real meal. His mother serves roast chicken with potatoes, green beans in butter, fresh bread, cheese, fruit preserves. Marie tries to eat slowly, tries to maintain dignity, but she hasn't seen this much food at once in 6 months. She eats until she feels sick, then eats more, her body desperately hoarding calories against the lean days it knows are coming. Pierre's father watches her with a physician's eye, he's a doctor, and says nothing. But after dinner, he wraps the leftover chicken in paper and hands it to her as she's leaving. "A gift for your landlady," he says, though everyone in the room knows Marie doesn't share food with her landlady. Pierre walks her home through the dark streets, carrying the wrapped chicken, talking about the structure of crystals. At her building's entrance, he kisses her. The kiss tastes like cherry bread. Not because there was cherry bread at dinner, there wasn't, but because 3 days ago, Pierre brought her a small loaf from a bakery near his laboratory, claiming he'd bought too much and it would go stale if someone didn't eat it. She'd eaten it over 2 days, savoring every sweet bite, and apparently some of that sweetness lingered. Their courtship unfolds in laboratory notebooks and shared meals. Pierre brings food wrapped in paper, claiming his mother cooked too much. Marie brings calculations she's completed, problems she's solved, questions about magnetic moment and crystal lattice structure. They work side by side at benches in his laboratory, hardly speaking sometimes, just the scratch of pencils and the quiet hum of electrical equipment. Pierre proposes in the summer of 1895. Not with a ring. Marie would sell a ring to buy equipment, but with a plan. They'll marry and work together. They'll share laboratory space. They'll pursue research no one else thinks is important, and they'll do it together. Marie accepts, not despite the unconventional nature of the proposal, but because of it. She's found someone who understands that her hunger for knowledge exceeds every other appetite. They marry in July, a civil ceremony with minimal fuss. Marie wears a dark blue dress because it won't show laboratory stains. No white gown, no veil, no church blessing. Just signatures in a municipal office and a wedding breakfast at Pierre's parents' house. The wedding gift they give each other is 2 bicycles, purchased with money Pierre's father slipped to his son. These bicycles will carry them through the French countryside on rare holidays, will serve as transportation to laboratories across Paris, will become symbols of their partnership, 2 vehicles side by side, traveling the same road. But here's what strikes me as most remarkable about this period. Marie is still desperately poor. Pierre's salary is modest. They rent a small apartment that's barely warmer than her garret was. Yet she's earned her master's degree in physics, scoring first in her class. She's earned a second master's degree in mathematics, scoring second in her class. She's proven that a woman from Russian-controlled Poland, living on radishes and chocolate, can outperform every wealthy French man in the Faculty of Sciences. She's proven it to the professors who doubted her. She's proven it to herself. And most importantly, she's found a partner who believes her potential is unlimited. Pierre doesn't see a woman who needs protection or guidance. He sees a mind as sharp as his own, a curiosity as deep as his own, a dedication to understanding the physical world that matches and perhaps exceeds his own. Together, they begin looking for a research project worthy of their combined talents, something no one else is investigating, something that might reveal fundamental truths about matter and energy. They don't know yet what that project will be, don't know that it's waiting for them in the recent work of Henri Becquerel, who has observed something impossible: uranium compounds exposing photographic plates in the dark, creating images without light, radiating some unknown energy that shouldn't exist according to everything physics believes about energy conservation. Marie, reading Becquerel's papers in the library, feels something stir in her chest. The same feeling she had holding the spectroscope at age 17. The sense of standing before a door no one else can see. The door is about to open, and what lies beyond it will change everything. The laboratory is a converted shed on the grounds of the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry. Calling it a laboratory is generous. It was a dissecting room for medical students before the medical school moved to better facilities. The walls still carry the smell of formaldehyde and something else, something sweet and organic that won't quite wash away. The roof leaks. The windows don't close properly. In summer, the temperature inside reaches 40 degrees Celsius. In winter, it drops below freezing. This is where Marie and Pierre will spend the next 4 years. This is where they'll process 8 tons of uranium ore residue. This is where they'll discover 2 new elements and prove that atoms, unchangeable since ancient Greece, can actually explode. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, Marie needs to choose her research subject. It's 1896, and she's looking for a topic for her doctoral dissertation. Not many women pursue doctorates. Not many people pursue doctorates in physics. The combination makes her almost unique, and uniqueness brings both opportunity and isolation. She reads everything being published about recent discoveries. There's Röntgen's X-rays, mysterious radiation that passes through flesh but not bone. There's Becquerel's observation about uranium salts, how they expose photographic plates through black paper. Most physicists think these are curiosities, not worth serious investigation. Probably some chemical reaction. Probably an artifact of the experimental setup. Probably nothing fundamental. Marie thinks differently. She reads Becquerel's papers and sees a question no one else is asking. If uranium produces this radiation, do other elements do the same? Is this a property unique to uranium, or is it something more universal? And most intriguing, where does the energy come from? Because that's the real mystery. Uranium sits on a shelf doing nothing, yet it continuously emits energy that can expose photographic plates, ionize air, create electrical effects. It never runs down, never needs charging, never consumes fuel. According to everything known about energy conservation, this is impossible. Energy must come from somewhere, must be transformation of one form into another. But uranium just radiates steadily, forever, violating the first law of thermodynamics as casually as sunrise violates darkness. Pierre builds her an electrometer based on principles he and his brother discovered years earlier. It's more sensitive than anything else available, capable of measuring tiny electrical currents created when radiation ionizes air molecules. Marie begins systematic testing. Every element she can obtain, every compound. Samples borrowed from colleagues, purchased from chemical suppliers, scraped from museum collections. She discovers something immediate and startling. Thorium produces the same radiation uranium does. 2 elements, nowhere near each other on the periodic table, both emitting this mysterious energy. So it's not unique to uranium. It's a property that multiple elements share. She needs a word for this property. She invents one: radioactivity, the quality of radiating energy without apparent cause. But then she discovers something that makes no sense. Pitchblende uranium ore is more radioactive than pure uranium. Considerably more radioactive, as much as 4 times more active than the amount of uranium it contains should allow. This is like weighing a mixture and finding it heavier than the sum of its components. It violates basic mathematics. There's only one explanation. Pitchblende must contain something else, something far more radioactive than uranium, something no one has identified because it exists in such tiny quantities that normal chemical analysis can't detect it. Marie is proposing the existence of elements no one has ever seen, identified solely by their radioactive emissions. It's brilliant. It's audacious. It's very possibly wrong. Pierre stops his own research on crystal magnetism. This is more important. If Marie is right, they're looking at entirely new elements, possibly new physics. Definitely a revolution in chemistry. They work together now, equal partners, sharing every calculation and observation. The School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry gives them the dissecting shed and its attached courtyard. The space is so unsuitable for delicate chemistry that any other researcher would refuse it. But Marie and Pierre have been conducting sensitive measurements in rooms that freeze their samples solid. They can work anywhere. They need pitchblende, lots of it. Not the refined uranium compounds they've been testing, but raw ore, complete with all its mysterious radioactive contaminants. The problem is that pitchblende is expensive. After uranium is extracted for use in glass coloring and ceramic glazes, the waste residue gets dumped. But hauling tons of waste from Bohemian mines to Paris costs money they don't have. Marie writes to the Austrian government, which controls the mines at Joachimsthal. She explains her research. She asks if she can purchase the waste residue. The response is skeptical but amused. A woman scientist wanting industrial waste. Strange but harmless. They can have the residue for the cost of transportation. Several tons of it if they want. The material is worthless anyway, mildly radioactive mining waste that's expensive to dispose of safely. The first shipment arrives in burlap sacks marked with skull and crossbone symbols. Toxic material. Handle with care. The sacks are unloaded in the courtyard. Brown residue that looks like coarse dirt mixed with pine needles. This is pitch blende, after most of the uranium has been extracted. What remains should be even less radioactive than the original ore. Instead, Marie's tests show it's intensely active. Whatever they're looking for must be concentrated in this waste. Now begins work that will take years. Each batch of residue must be processed through multiple stages. First, dissolve it in acid. Marie stands over boiling cauldrons, stirring 100-pound batches with an iron rod as tall as she is. The fumes are so caustic they burn holes through her laboratory dress, discolor her hands, make her eyes stream with tears. The courtyard fills with smoke that neighbors complain about. Chemical smoke. Strange colored smoke. Sometimes smoke that seems to glow faintly in the dim evening light after dissolution, precipitation. Add chemicals that cause certain elements to form solid compounds that settle out of solution. Filter the solids from the liquids. Crystallize the solids by slowly evaporating water. Redissolve, reprecipitate, recrystallize. Each cycle concentrates the radioactive material slightly, moving it through a cascade of separations that gradually eliminate everything else. Marie tracks the radioactivity at every step using Pierre's electrometer. The radiation guides her like a beacon. When she processes a batch and the radioactivity stays with one fraction, she knows that's the path to follow. When it splits between multiple fractions, she knows she's separating different radioactive elements. The radiation becomes her map through terra incognita, charting elements no one has ever isolated. After 4 months of processing 1 ton of pitchblende residue, she isolates a sample that's 400 times more radioactive than uranium. The amount she has is tiny, perhaps 1/10 of a gram, but its radioactivity is so intense it glows in the dark. A soft blue-green luminescence, light without heat, light without combustion. Light that comes from nowhere and goes nowhere, simply existing as this substance radiates its inexplicable energy. She carries the sample home in her pocket. As she walks through dark Paris streets, she can see the glow through the fabric of her dress, a small blue star against her hip. Pierre walks beside her, and occasionally she opens her hand to show him. The glow reflects in his eyes, in her eyes, this impossible light that shouldn't exist. They work through the separation process dozens more times, refining their technique, producing increasingly concentrated samples. Marie identifies not 1, but 2 new elements. She names the first polonium, after her suppressed homeland. Poland doesn't exist on any map, erased by Russia and Prussia and Austria, but it exists in the periodic table now. Her small rebellion, a permanent testimony that some things can't be conquered. The second element she names radium, from the Latin word for ray, because this element radiates like nothing else in nature. Polonium is intensely radioactive, yes, but it's also intensely rare. Radium is rare too, but present in larger quantities. Present enough that if they process sufficient pitchblende, they might isolate pure metallic radium. Might prove beyond any doubt that this isn't experimental error or wishful thinking, but actual new elements with specific atomic weights and chemical properties. To isolate pure radium requires processing tons more residue. The work becomes Marie's obsession. She's in the courtyard stirring boiling acid before dawn. She's filtering precipitates until long after dark. Her hands are scarred from acid burns. Her clothes are falling apart from chemical exposure. Her hair is streaked with grey, though she's only 30 years old. Pierre helps when he can, but he has teaching duties. The grinding physical labor falls mostly to Marie. Consider what she's doing. She's processing industrial waste with equipment better suited to cooking than chemistry. She's working in a shed that offers no protection from the caustic fumes. She's searching for elements present at concentrations of 1 part per million or less. Modern chemistry would use spectrometers and computers and protective equipment. Marie has an iron rod and determination. After processing 1 ton of pitchblende, she isolates 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride. After 3 tons, she has enough to perform chemical analysis, showing radium behaves like calcium, residing in the same column of the periodic table. After 5 tons, she has enough to measure radium's atomic weight, 226, making it the heaviest element yet discovered. But the radiation. The radiation is beyond anything they anticipated. Radium is so intensely radioactive, it creates problems they've never imagined. It exposes photographic plates 3 rooms away through solid walls. It makes the air conductive, disrupting their electrical measurements. It burns through paper, through cloth, through wood. Pierre keeps a sample in a drawer in his desk, and the drawer's oak bottom develops burn marks. Not char marks from heat, but something stranger. The wood turns dark and brittle, as if aged a century in days. They begin carrying samples on their persons to study the biological effects. Pierre straps a radium tube to his arm for several hours. The skin beneath turns red, then begins to blister, then develops an open wound that takes months to heal and leaves a permanent scar. Marie finds that her fingertips are constantly irritated, the skin peeling and splitting. She attributes it to the acid work, but it's actually radiation damage. Her fingers are absorbing massive doses every time she handles her samples. The radiation penetrates everything. They keep their radium samples in glass tubes sealed with cork stoppers, but the radiation passes through glass like it isn't there. They try lead containers. The radiation passes through lead too, though lead does reduce it somewhat. There's no perfect shield. The radiation simply exists, pouring out of this element continuously, an energy source that never depletes. In 1910, after 12 years of work, Marie finally isolates pure metallic radium. 1 full gram, 1 gram from 8 tons of pitchblende residue, 1 gram representing 40,000 hours of physical labor, countless acid burns, permanent health damage, and the discovery of a new element that will transform medicine, industry, and our understanding of atomic structure. This gram of radium glows continuously, bright enough to read by in a dark room. It generates heat, enough to melt its own weight in ice every hour. Not from chemical reaction, not from any identifiable energy source, just continuous radiation of energy that comes from somewhere inside the atom itself. Pierre performs an experiment. He seals the radium in a tube with a small sample of air. After several days, he opens the tube and analyzes the gas inside. It's no longer pure air. It contains helium, a gas that wasn't there before. Somehow, radium is creating helium, creating an element that wasn't present initially. Transmutation, alchemy made real. But there's more. The tube also contains a different radioactive gas, later identified as radon. And the radium itself weighs slightly less than it did before. Over time, radium is changing into other elements. It's decaying, transforming, dying. The atom isn't eternal, isn't the fundamental, unchangeable building block Aristotle imagined. It's dynamic. It evolves. It explodes piece by piece, releasing energy as it transforms from one element into another. This is the heresy they're about to present to the scientific world. That atoms can change, that elements can transmute. That radioactivity isn't some quirk of uranium, but a window into the atom's interior. Proof that the atom has structure, has internal energy, has a life cycle of birth and death measured in half-lives, extending across geological time. Marie stands in the dissecting shed, holding her gram of pure radium, and understands that she's looking at a kind of fire that burns without fuel. A star contained in a tube, the same process that powers the sun, happening in her hand. The universe has revealed something fundamental about its operation, and the revelation came through 8 tons of industrial waste processed by a woman working in a shed that leaks. She places the radium in its lead-lined container and walks home through the darkness. Behind her, the shed glows faintly blue, phosphorescence from 1,000 surfaces contaminated with traces of radioactive material. The walls shine, the floor shines. The very air seems to shimmer with invisible energy. What she doesn't know yet is that this blue glow is a warning, that the beautiful light is slowly killing everything it touches, that the radiation she's absorbed over years of work is writing damage into every cell of her body, that the discovery she's made will save millions through radiation therapy while killing hundreds through radiation weapons, that her gram of radium contains enough energy to power a city or destroy one. For now, she only knows she's found something new, something true, something that changes everything. The Sorbonne's main amphitheater holds 500 people. On June 25, 1903, every seat is filled. Men in formal academic dress, professors in their ceremonial robes, journalists with notebooks, scientists who've traveled from across Europe. They're here to witness something unprecedented. A woman defending a doctoral thesis in physics. Marie stands at the lectern, wearing a simple black dress. No decoration, no jewelry. Behind her, a blackboard covered with equations. Before her, 5 examiners seated at a long table. Gabriel Lippmann, her thesis advisor. Henri Moissan, France's foremost chemist. Edouard Bouty, professor of physics. These men will determine whether her work merits a doctorate or whether the last 8 years have been an elaborate mistake. She begins speaking. Her voice is quiet but steady. She doesn't apologize for her accent, doesn't acknowledge the novelty of her gender. She simply presents the evidence. Radioactivity is a property of atoms themselves, not of molecular arrangements. She demonstrates this by showing that radioactivity remains constant regardless of temperature, pressure, or chemical combination. Whether uranium is hot or cold, solid or dissolved, pure or combined with other elements, its radioactivity never changes. Therefore, the source must be the atom itself. Atoms are not eternal. She presents measurements showing that polonium's radioactivity decreases over time, following a precise mathematical curve. Half of any sample's radioactivity disappears in 138 days. Half of what remains disappears in another 138 days. This pattern continues forever, never quite reaching zero. Atoms are dying, transforming into other elements at rates determined by their internal structure. Radium transmutes into helium and lead. She shows the spectroscopic evidence. Gas collected from sealed radium samples contains helium that wasn't there initially. The radium itself gradually transforms into lead over thousands of years. Elements are not fixed categories, but stages in a process of atomic decay. The energy comes from inside the atom. She calculates the total energy 1 gram of radium releases over its lifetime. The number is staggering, enough to lift a 50-kilogram weight to a height of 100,000 kilometers. This energy doesn't come from chemical reactions or any known external source. It must be stored within atomic structure itself, released gradually as atoms disintegrate. Lord Kelvin, watching from the audience, shakes his head. Impossible. Atoms have been understood as eternal since ancient Greece. Democritus proposed atoms as unchangeable particles, the fundamental units from which everything is built. 2,000 years of physics rest on this foundation. This Polish woman is proposing that the foundation itself is wrong. But Marie doesn't argue with philosophy. She presents measurements. Here is the decrease in radioactivity over time. Here is the helium produced from radium. Here is the energy calculation based on careful calorimetry. These are facts, not theories. The universe behaves this way, whether we find it philosophically satisfying or not. The examination lasts 3 hours. The committee asks questions about experimental technique, about possible sources of error, about alternative explanations. Marie answers each question with precision, referring to specific measurements, specific controls, specific observations that eliminate other possibilities. She's not defending a hypothesis. She's defending years of careful observation that point to only one conclusion. The committee retires to deliberate. Marie waits with Pierre in an anteroom. He's holding her hand, though whether to comfort her or steady himself isn't clear. After 30 minutes, the committee returns. The thesis is approved with distinction. Marie Curie, she's using Pierre's name now, finding it easier in French society, becomes the first woman in France to earn a doctorate in physics. The audience applauds. Journalists rush to file their stories. Scientists crowd around asking about the experimental details, but the real transformation happens more quietly. The physics community must now grapple with what Marie has proven. Atoms change. Elements transmute. Energy emerges from nowhere, or rather from somewhere inside atomic structure no one has yet mapped. The implications cascade outward, like radiation itself. If atoms contain this much energy, what are atoms made of? If elements can transmute, how many elements are truly stable? If radioactivity follows these precise mathematical laws, what determines those laws? Every answer breeds new questions. Then on April 19th, 1906, everything changes again. Pierre is walking home through rain on Rue Dauphine. The streets are slick, crowded with carriages and wagons. He steps between two stopped carriages to cross, slips on the wet cobblestones, falls. A loaded wagon behind him can't stop in time. The wheel passes over his head. Death is instant. His skull crushed, his brain destroyed. When Marie arrives at the morgue to identify the body, she finds something no one expects. Pierre's brain tissue is still faintly radioactive. After years of carrying radium samples in his pockets, holding radioactive materials in his hands, working in contaminated spaces, his very cells have absorbed enough radioactive material to register on sensitive instruments. He's glowing, faintly, posthumously, with the light of his own discoveries. Marie doesn't speak at the funeral, doesn't cry publicly, returns to their laboratory the next day and continues the work they started together. But something in her has calcified, hardened like radium-damaged tissue. She will complete the work. She will prove everything they discovered. She will defend radioactivity against every skeptic and rival, not for glory, not even for knowledge, but because Pierre died believing this work mattered, and she will make his death mean something. The university offers her Pierre's professorship. They expect her to decline, to return to Poland or retire into widowhood. Instead, she accepts. On November 5th, 1906, she delivers her first lecture to 800 students and journalists who've come to watch a widow attempt her dead husband's job. She walks to the lectern, opens Pierre's last lecture notes, finds the sentence where he stopped mid-paragraph, and begins speaking, continuing exactly where Pierre left off, her voice steady, no acknowledgement of the tragedy, no explanation of the gap, just seamless continuation, as if death were merely an interruption in an ongoing conversation about atomic structure. The audience sits in stunned silence. This isn't grief. This is defiance. She's announcing that the work continues, that death doesn't end discovery, that Pierre's last sentence will become her first sentence in a story that hasn't finished. But the world isn't finished with her either. In 1911, scandal erupts. Marie is having an affair with Paul Langevin, a married physicist who was Pierre's student. Langevin's wife discovers love letters and sells them to the press. Suddenly, every newspaper in France publishes intimate correspondence. Foreign harlot, homewrecker, betrayer of Pierre's memory. Mobs gather outside her home shouting insults. Colleagues who respected her science now avoid her publicly. The Nobel Committee, which has awarded her a second prize, this time in chemistry, for isolating pure radium, sends a letter suggesting she not attend the ceremony. The scandal, they note delicately, might overshadow the honor. Marie travels to Stockholm anyway. accepts her second Nobel Prize in person, delivers a lecture about radium's properties, making no mention of the scandal, no defense of her personal life. Just science, just the work that matters. She's the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. The first woman to win a Nobel Prize at all. And she accepts the honor, while half of Europe considers her a disgrace. Think about what this means. A woman who survived Russian occupation, poverty in Paris, 12 years of acid burns and radiation exposure, the death of her husband, and now public humiliation. And she stands on that Stockholm stage because the science matters more than comfort. Because atoms don't care about scandal. Because radioactivity follows precise laws, regardless of what newspapers print about the scientist who discovered it. She returns to Paris and continues working, continues lecturing, continues refining techniques for isolating radioactive elements. The scandal fades because scandals always do, while discoveries remain. Her 2 Nobel Prizes hang on the wall of her laboratory. Her gram of radium glows in its lead-lined container. And the atomic heresy she proposed, that atoms can die, releasing energy as they transform, has become the foundation of 20th century physics. But the radiation never stops working. Every exposure accumulated, every hour spent with radioactive materials adding to a lifetime dose, that's slowly rewriting her cellular structure. The beautiful blue light is patient. And in the end, it always wins. August 1914. Europe descends into war with the efficiency of a chemical reaction, nation triggering nation in a cascade that cannot be stopped. France mobilizes. Men march toward Belgium and the German frontier. Paris braces for invasion. Marie is 46 years old, director of the Radium Institute, one of the most respected scientists in Europe. She could evacuate, could take her daughters and her gram of precious radium to safety in England or Switzerland. Instead, she has the radium transported to Bordeaux for safekeeping and stays in Paris to consider how science might serve in war. The answer comes from technology she's studied extensively: X-rays. Röntgen's mysterious radiation that passes through flesh, but not bone, making the invisible visible. Military surgeons need X-rays to locate bullets and shrapnel in wounded soldiers, but X-ray equipment exists only in major hospitals, far from the battlefields where men are dying. Marie decides to bring X-rays to the front lines. She convinces the French military to let her transform 20 automobiles into mobile radiological units. Cars fitted with X-ray equipment, developing darkrooms, electrical generators. She calls them petites Curie, little Curies. The name sticks, though Marie prefers to call them practical solutions to immediate problems. There's one significant obstacle. Marie doesn't know how to drive. She's 50 years old, has spent her life in laboratories, has never operated an automobile. So she teaches herself, learns the mechanical principles of internal combustion engines. Learns to change tires, adjust carburetors, repair electrical systems. Because these vehicles will break down constantly, and there won't be mechanics at casualty clearing stations. She also teaches herself human anatomy, studies skeletal structure, learns to read X-ray images, understands what surgeons need to see. Then she trains other women, daughters of aristocrats, wives of professors, anyone willing to work near the fighting. The military won't send women to combat zones, but Marie simply drives there anyway. And once her X-ray unit is set up and soldiers are being helped, no one orders her to leave. September 1914. The Battle of the Marne. German forces have pushed to within 30 miles of Paris. The French and British armies make a desperate stand along the Marne River. Casualties overwhelm the medical stations. Men lie waiting for surgery, bullets and shrapnel embedded in their bodies. Surgeons cutting blind because they can't see the metal inside flesh. Marie drives her petite Curie to a casualty station just behind the lines. The vehicle breaks down twice during the journey. She repairs it both times, her hands black with grease, her formal dress utterly ruined. At the station, she sets up the X-ray equipment in a tent. Electrical generator running outside, X-ray tube suspended over a wooden table, photographic plates ready for developing. The surgeons are skeptical. A woman scientist with experimental equipment arriving uninvited at a battlefield. But then Marie shows them what she can do. A soldier with a bullet somewhere in his shoulder. She positions him under the X-ray tube, exposes a plate, develops it in her portable darkroom. 5 minutes later, she hands the surgeon an image showing the bullet's exact location. The surgeon can now remove it precisely without exploratory cutting that often kills patients from shock and infection. Word spreads. Other medical stations request X-ray support. Marie recruits her 17-year-old daughter Irene to help operate the equipment. Mother and daughter work side by side in tents where the ground shakes from artillery, where the wounded arrive in waves, where there's never enough time or supplies or sleep. The work is exhausting beyond anything Marie experienced in her laboratory. She operates the X-ray equipment for 12, 18, sometimes 72 straight hours when casualties are heavy. The tubes generate intense radiation, far more than the radium she worked with, concentrated into minutes instead of years. She absorbs radiation equivalent to handling pure radium daily. Her hands develop the same peeling, cracking symptoms she had during her radium isolation work. Her blood tests show declining white cell counts. She ignores these symptoms because soldiers are dying and X-rays save lives. Irene learns to operate the equipment as skillfully as her mother. At 18, she's running her own petite Curie, driving to casualty stations, training field surgeons in radiological techniques. Marie watches her daughter work with equipment that's slowly poisoning them both and feels pride mixed with horror. She's passing on knowledge. She's also passing on exposure to radiation that will eventually cause the leukemia that kills Irene decades later. But what choice exists? Men are being shredded by industrial weapons that turn bodies into puzzles of metal and flesh. X-rays offer the only way to solve these puzzles without cutting blindly. The choice isn't between safe work and dangerous work. It's between dangerous work that saves lives and letting soldiers die because women aren't supposed to be near battlefields. The petites Curies develop a reputation. Field commanders request them specifically. Surgeons who've worked with Marie's X-ray units write to headquarters demanding more. The military, initially skeptical, now wants 20 units, then 50, then 100. Marie can't build that many vehicles, but she can train operators. She establishes training programs in Paris, teaches women the physics of X-rays, the anatomy they need to know, the maintenance their equipment will require. She's firm about the dangers. Radiation exposure will damage your health. You'll absorb doses that may cause problems years or decades later. But soldiers are dying now, and this technology saves them. 200 women volunteer. Marie trains them all, sends them to casualty stations across France and Belgium. These women, later called Curie's soldiers, will examine over 1 million wounded men by war's end. They'll locate bullets in lungs, shrapnel in brains, broken bones that need setting, internal bleeding that needs immediate surgery. They'll work in conditions where explosions are constant background noise and the smell of gangrene mixes with chemical weapons drifting on the wind. Marie herself drives between stations, troubleshooting equipment, training new operators, pushing her aging vehicles through mud that swallows wheels to the axles. She's 50 years old, working 18-hour days, eating irregularly, sleeping in whatever shelter is available. Her health deteriorating visibly, weight dropping. Cataracts beginning to cloud her vision, hands permanently damaged from radiation. At the Battle of Verdun, she operates for 36 straight hours as casualties pour in from the longest battle of the war. The X-ray tube overheats repeatedly. She lets it cool, then continues. Develops plates in a darkroom that's really just a tent with black cloth over the entrance. Shows surgeons where the shrapnel is, where the bullet's lodged, which wounds will kill if not treated immediately. A shell lands 50 meters from her tent. The blast knocks over her generator, shatters her X-ray tube. Marie calmly sets about repairing what can be repaired, replacing what can't. 2 hours later, she's operating again. The surgeons watch her work and understand they're witnessing something extraordinary. Not just technical skill, but absolute commitment to the principle that knowledge should serve humanity regardless of personal cost. The war ends in November 1918. Marie has operated 20 mobile X-ray units, trained 200 radiological operators, examined more than 1 million wounded soldiers, given thousands of men the chance to survive wounds that would have killed them without radiological guidance. The French government offers her the Legion of Honor in recognition of her service. She refuses it. Medals, she says, won't bring back the dead, won't advance scientific knowledge, won't help the men who survived the war but lost limbs, lost sight, lost lungs to gas attacks. If France wants to honor her, fund research into radiation therapy for cancer. Fund institutions where scientists can work. Fund the future, not the past. But privately, she knows what the war has cost her. 4 years of intense radiation exposure added to 20 years of laboratory exposure. Her bone marrow struggling to produce healthy blood cells. Her kidneys showing early signs of failure. Her vision failing from cataracts caused by radiation damage. She's 51 years old, and her body is aging like that of someone 30 years older. Still, she returns to her laboratory, returns to training students, returns to the work of understanding radioactivity's properties and potential. Because the war demonstrated something crucial. Radiation can heal as well as harm. X-rays saved countless lives. Radium therapy for cancer was showing promise before the war interrupted. The challenge now is developing these technologies safely, learning to harness radiation's power without absorbing fatal doses. Marie knows she won't live to see the full realization of these technologies, knows the radiation has already done too much damage, but she can train the next generation, can establish institutions, can ensure that her discoveries benefit humanity long after she's gone. The beautiful blue light that fascinated her in 1898 still glows in her laboratory, still mysterious, still deadly, still holding secrets about atomic structure that will occupy scientists for generations. Marie has given her health to understand this light. Now she'll give whatever years remain to ensuring others can study it safely, can use it wisely, can build on foundations she and Pierre laid in a converted dissecting shed. The war taught her that science and suffering are intimately connected. Every discovery that helps can also harm. Every technology that heals can also kill. The choice isn't whether to pursue knowledge, but how to use knowledge once gained. Marie chooses healing, chooses life, even as radiation slowly extinguishes her own. By 1920, radium has become the most valuable substance on Earth. 1 gram costs $100,000, more than gold, more than diamonds, more than any material ever sold. The price reflects both its rarity and its demand. Industries want radium for luminous paint. Hospitals want radium for cancer therapy. Researchers want radium to study atomic structure. Everyone wants radium, and only a handful of facilities worldwide can produce it. In New Jersey, the United States Radium Corporation operates a factory where young women paint watch dials with radium-based luminous paint. The paint glows in the dark, perfect for watches that soldiers and sailors need to read at night. The work is delicate, requiring fine brush strokes to paint tiny numbers on watch faces. The factory employs hundreds of women, mostly teenagers and young adults, paying them well by the standards of the time. The supervisors teach the women a technique called lip pointing. After each brush stroke, touch the brush tip to your lips to create a fine point. Dip in radium paint. Paint a number. Lip point again. The process is efficient, allowing workers to paint hundreds of watch dials daily. The managers assure the women that radium is harmless, actually beneficial. Radium will give you rosy cheeks, they say. It's healthy. Doctors use it for medicine. Some of the women paint their nails with the luminous paint. Paint their teeth so they'll glow when they smile. Paint designs on their dresses for dancing. The radium glows beautifully in dark dance halls, making these women shimmer like fairy tale creatures. They call themselves the ghost girls because they glow in photographs. It's all tremendous fun, this magical substance that makes everything beautiful. What the managers don't mention is that radium behaves chemically like calcium. When ingested, it travels to bones and teeth, replacing calcium in the crystalline matrix of skeletal structure. Once deposited in bone, radium continues decaying, continues emitting radiation, continues destroying tissue from within. The women are slowly turning their skeletons radioactive, one lip-pointed brush stroke at a time. The first symptoms appear after several months. A worker's tooth becomes loose, falls out without bleeding. Her jaw aches constantly. X-rays show something impossible. Her jawbone is dissolving, literally disappearing, as radiation destroys the bone cells faster than her body can replace them. Doctors call it radium jaw, a condition they've never seen before. More women develop symptoms. Bones that break spontaneously. Anemia from bone marrow failure. Tumors in places tumors shouldn't grow. One woman's leg bone shatters while she's walking downstairs. Another develops a tumor in her hip that glows visibly through her skin at night. The ghost girls are dying, their bodies betraying them from the inside. The company denies everything. Radium is safe, they insist. These women must have other conditions. Syphilis, perhaps, tuberculosis, anything but radium poisoning, because admitting radium poisoning means liability, lawsuits, the end of a profitable industry. But the evidence is impossible to ignore. When one of the ghost girls dies and is buried, her body remains radioactive. The coffin emits measurable radiation. Her bones will remain radioactive for 1,600 years, glowing faintly in their grave long after everyone who knew her is dead and forgotten. Marie hears about the radium girls. She's horrified but also defensive. Radium properly handled is safe, she insists. These women were ingesting it, which is completely different from external exposure. Her own work involved careful procedures, protective measures. The comparison isn't fair, except Marie's own body tells a different story. Her fingernails have fallen out, not grown back properly. Her hands are covered in scars from radiation burns that never quite heal. Her blood tests show declining white cell counts, a classic symptom of radiation exposure. She's developing cataracts, her vision progressively clouding. Her kidneys are failing, unable to filter toxins effectively. She's 53 years old and requires a cane to walk. Her laboratory notebooks document the progression. Early pages show precise, elegant handwriting, equations written with mathematical beauty. Later pages show shakier writing, letters that wander and blur. By 1930, her handwriting is barely legible, each character a struggle. She can't hold a pen steady anymore, can't see clearly enough to check her calculations. Still works, still supervises students, still publishes papers, but her body is systematically failing. The notebooks themselves are radioactive. Every page Marie touched, while handling radium samples, absorbed contamination. Decades later, these notebooks will be stored in lead-lined boxes at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Researchers wanting to study her original work will need to sign liability waivers and wear protective equipment. The paper itself won't be safe to touch for another 1,500 years, approximately the half-life of radium. Marie's daughter Irene now runs much of the laboratory work. Mother and daughter collaborate on papers about radioactivity's properties, about radiation therapy protocols, about atomic structure. They're both showing symptoms of radiation exposure. Both have damaged hands, declining blood counts, increasing fatigue. Irene is only 33 years old, but her health is already compromised by years of X-ray work during the war and radioactivity research afterward. Marie refuses to acknowledge that radiation is killing her. When doctors suggest she reduce her laboratory time, she ignores them. When colleagues point out that her symptoms match those of the radium girls, she dismisses the comparison. She's a scientist, not a factory worker. She understands radiation. She takes precautions. But what precautions existed in 1900 when she was processing 8 tons of pitch blender? What precautions existed during the war when she operated X-ray equipment for 72 straight hours? What precautions exist now when the very air in her laboratory is contaminated with radioactive dust that's accumulated over 30 years? The truth is that Marie discovered radioactivity before anyone understood its dangers. She spent years handling materials that would make modern radiation safety officers evacuate entire buildings. She breathed air saturated with radon gas. She carried radium in her pockets. She touched radioactive compounds with bare hands, not from carelessness, but from ignorance. No one knew. How could they know? She was discovering the effects while experiencing them. By 1934, Marie can barely function. Her vision is so clouded by cataracts, she can't read her own writing. Her kidneys are failing, filling her blood with toxins. Her bone marrow has stopped producing red blood cells effectively, leaving her constantly exhausted and short of breath. She's 66 years old and dying of aplastic anemia, bone marrow failure caused by radiation destroying the cells responsible for making blood. She's admitted to a sanatorium in Savoy, in the French Alps. Clean air, mountain views, rest. As if rest could repair decades of radiation damage. As if clean air could scrub radioactive isotopes from her bones. Her doctors know she's dying. She knows she's dying, but she continues discussing research with visitors, continues planning experiments she'll never perform, continues believing that science matters more than personal survival. Her last words, according to those present, are about the beautiful light she's hallucinating, seeing visions of blue-green radium glow that filled her laboratory, seeing the light that fascinated her for 36 years, seeing the discovery that defined her life and ended it, except it's not just hallucination. The radiation has damaged her optic nerves, creating phantom images, false signals her brain interprets as light. She's literally seeing radiation damage, experiencing it as beauty, the thing that killed her, appearing in her final moments as something lovely. A fitting end, perhaps, for someone who gave everything to understand invisible forces. Marie Curie dies on July 4th, 1934. The official cause is aplastic anemia from radiation exposure. The unofficial cause is 36 years of handling radioactive materials before anyone understood the consequences. She's buried next to Pierre in Sceaux Cemetery, her coffin lined with lead to protect the living from radiation, still emanating from her bones. Albert Einstein. Hearing of her death, writes, Marie Curie is, of all celebrated beings, the only one whom fame has not corrupted. He doesn't know that fame is the least corrupting force in her story. Radiation corrupted her at the cellular level, slowly, invisibly, permanently. Fame was merely inconvenient. Radiation was fatal. The Radium Institute she founded continues operating. The protocols she developed for radiation therapy save thousands of cancer patients annually. The element polonium she discovered and named after her suppressed Homeland Power's space probes exploring the outer solar system. The radium she isolated treats tumors in children not yet born when she died. The atomic age she accidentally initiated will kill 200,000 people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and save millions more through nuclear medicine. Her legacy is this contradiction. Discovery that heals and harms. Knowledge that illuminates and destroys. Science that serves humanity while consuming scientists. She proved that women could do physics, chemistry, could discover new elements, could reshape our understanding of matter itself. And she proved that understanding the universe sometimes means sacrificing yourself to it. The beautiful blue light still glows in laboratories worldwide. Still fascinating. Still deadly. Still holding secrets we haven't fully unraveled. Marie Curie spent her life trying to understand this light, and in the end, the light understood her better than she understood it. Understood that human tissue is merely matter, that cellular structure is merely chemistry, that genius offers no protection against radiation. The gram of radium she isolated in 1910 still exists, though scattered now among various institutions and experiments, each fragment still glowing, still generating heat, still decaying at precisely the rate she measured over a century ago. The radium will outlast everyone who knew her, will outlast this century and the next and the one after that, will continue its patient transformation from radium to radon to lead, following laws Marie helped discover, indifferent to the scientist who revealed them. In the Pantheon in Paris, Marie's remains were reinterred in 1995, making her the first woman honored on her own merits in that monument to France's greatest citizens. Her coffin required lead lining even then, 61 years after her death. The radiation persists. The beautiful light never stops shining, never stops destroying, never stops revealing the truth she dedicated her life to understanding. That truth is simple and terrible. The universe runs on forces that don't care about us. Radiation doesn't distinguish between the scientist studying it and the factory worker poisoned by it. Discovery doesn't protect the discoverer. Knowledge comes at a cost, and sometimes the cost is everything you have to give. Stand with me for a moment in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. We're in a special archive, a room most visitors never see. On the shelves before us sit lead-lined boxes, each sealed with warning labels. Inside these boxes are Marie Curie's laboratory notebooks, the originals, the pages she touched while processing pitch blender, while isolating radium, while documenting the discovery that changed physics forever. You cannot simply open these boxes and read her notes. To examine Marie's handwriting, you must sign a liability waiver. You must wear protective equipment. You must acknowledge that these notebooks are still radioactive, that the paper itself absorbed contamination from her fingers, from the laboratory air, from the radium samples she handled. The half-life of radium is 1,600 years. Marie died in 1934. Do the mathematics. These notebooks won't be safe to touch until approximately the year 3500. Think about what that means. Marie's handwriting will remain dangerous for longer than civilization has existed since the Roman Empire. Students in the 36th century will finally be able to handle these pages without protection. We'll read her calculations about polonium and radium. We'll see the progression from confident early entries to the shaky writing of her final years. But for now, for the next 1,500 years, her notebooks are artifacts that testify to both discovery and danger. Her gram of radium sits in a different kind of containment now. Not the simple lead-lined boxes she used, but sophisticated shielding, designed by modern radiation safety experts who understand what Marie learned too late. That gram generates about 130 calories of heat per hour, enough to keep itself noticeably warmer than its surroundings forever. The energy comes from nowhere, or rather from the slow disintegration of atomic nuclei, each radium atom eventually transforming through a cascade of decay products until it finally becomes stable lead. Every year, approximately 1% of that original gram transforms into other elements. Radon gas, polonium, bismuth, lead. The process continues at a rate that cannot be accelerated or slowed. You cannot make radium decay faster by heating it or slower by cooling it. You cannot stop the process with chemistry or pressure or magnetism. Radioactive decay follows its own timekeeper, indifferent to external conditions, as steady as celestial mechanics. This is what Marie discovered, that atoms have lifespans, that elements are not eternal categories, but stages in a process of transformation. That matter itself is dynamic, evolving, dying. She found this truth by processing 8 tons of ore in a converted shed, by burning her hands with acid and radiation, by giving 36 years of her life to understanding forces that were simultaneously killing her. But consider what came from that sacrifice. Every cancer patient treated with radiation therapy, approximately 700,000 people annually worldwide, benefits from protocols Marie developed. The techniques she pioneered for using radium to kill tumor cells have been refined, made safer, but the fundamental principle remains hers. Aim radiation at cancer cells. They die faster than healthy tissue because they divide faster. It's not perfect. Radiation damages everything it touches. But cancer kills certainty, while radiation offers a chance. The Curie Institute in Paris, which Marie founded in 1920, has produced 5 more Nobel laureates. Scientists building on her work, extending her discoveries, using equipment she would recognize, even though the safety protocols would astound her. Modern researchers wear dosimeters that measure radiation exposure down to microsieverts. They work behind leaded glass shields. They handle radioactive materials with remote manipulators. They follow regulations that exist because Marie Curie and the Radium Girls taught us. Through their deaths, what happens when you don't respect radiation, her element polonium, named for the nation that didn't exist on maps when she was born, now powers space probes exploring beyond our solar system. Polonium's intense radioactivity makes it an ideal heat source for thermocouples that convert heat to electricity. The Voyager probes, launched in 1977, carried polonium power sources. They're now beyond the heliopause in interstellar space, still transmitting data 48 years later because polonium keeps generating heat, keeps powering their instruments, keeps enabling discovery. But polonium also killed. In 2006, Alexander Litvinenko, a Russian dissident living in London, was poisoned with polonium-210. A fatal dose slipped into his tea. He died 3 weeks later from radiation, destroying his bone marrow and internal organs. The same element Marie discovered, the same properties she measured, turned into an assassination weapon. Knowledge without conscience. Discovery without ethics. This is the paradox at the heart of Marie's legacy. Everything she discovered can heal or harm. Radium treats cancer and causes cancer. Polonium powers spacecraft and murders dissidents. Radiation kills tumors and kills patients. The knowledge itself is neutral. Atoms decay according to fixed laws, indifferent to human intention. What matters is how we use this knowledge, and Marie couldn't control that. No scientist can. The atomic age she initiated killed 200,000 people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bombs that ended World War II worked on principles Marie helped establish. That atoms contain enormous energy, that this energy can be released suddenly, catastrophically. That matter can be converted to energy according to Einstein's equation, which itself emerged from trying to understand radioactivity's impossible energy output. Marie died 11 years before Hiroshima. She never knew that her peaceful research into atomic structure would enable weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. Would she have continued her work if she'd known? Probably. She believed in knowledge for its own sake, believed that understanding the universe justified the risks. But she also believed science should serve humanity. The atomic bomb serves no one. Yet the same physics that enabled nuclear weapons also enabled nuclear medicine. Radiation therapy, medical imaging, sterilization of surgical equipment, food preservation, carbon dating that lets us understand archaeological timelines, power generation that produces no greenhouse gases. The applications multiply, healing and harming, often simultaneously. In the Pantheon in Paris, Marie's lead-lined coffin sits in the crypt among France's greatest citizens. Voltaire is there, Rousseau, Victor Hugo, Alexandre Dumas, and Marie Curie, the first woman honored on her own merits, still radioactive 90 years after her death. Still glowing faintly if you had instruments sensitive enough to detect it. Still dangerous enough to require lead shielding. She's the only person in history whose body had to be declared hazardous material for burial. The only corpse that comes with warning labels. The only remains that will remain dangerous for 1,000 years. This is her monument, more permanent than stone, more lasting than bronze. Her very bones testify to the forces she discovered, embodying the beautiful deadly light she spent her life trying to understand. But walk outside the Pantheon into the Latin Quarter where Marie studied. The streets are still there. Rue Flatter still climbs toward the heights where she froze in her garret. The Sorbonne still educates students, though women now outnumber men in many science programs. The transformation Marie helped enable continues, quieter than radiation, but just as persistent. Every woman who studies physics stands on foundations Marie poured. Every scientist who explores dangerous phenomena does so with safety protocols written in her sacrifice. Every cancer patient who survives radiation therapy owes something to the woman who discovered radium while destroying her own health. The legacy isn't simple. It's not purely positive, but it's indelible, written into the structure of modern science. Consider that Marie was born in 1867, when speaking Polish meant imprisonment and teaching science to girls meant death. She died in 1934, having won 2 Nobel Prizes, discovered 2 elements, founded an institute, trained hundreds of scientists, saved millions through radiation therapy, and proven that women belonged in laboratories as discoverers, not assistants. Between those 2 dates, 67 years of life, she transformed from a child memorizing the periodic table by candlelight to a scientist whose work reshaped the periodic table itself. From a student eating radishes for survival to a researcher who isolated the most valuable substance on Earth. From a refugee with forged papers to the first woman professor at the Sorbonne. The distance she traveled cannot be measured in kilometers, and the cost, everything.
Her health.
Her husband, her privacy, her final years, spent dying slowly from radiation poisoning while defending radioactivity's importance. She paid in full for every discovery, and the universe never offered refunds. But here's what I find remarkable. Marie would do it again. Even knowing the cost, even understanding that radiation was killing her, she continued working. Continued discovering, continued believing that understanding mattered more than comfort. Not from naivety. She knew the dangers by the end, but from conviction that knowledge itself justifies its price. Whether that conviction was wisdom or madness remains debatable. The Radium Girls might offer a different perspective. The victims of Hiroshima might question whether atomic knowledge serves humanity. But Marie believed, until her last hallucination of beautiful light, that discovery was humanity's highest calling. The half-life of radium is 1,600 years. The half-life of Marie's influence is longer, possibly permanent, because she didn't just discover radioactivity. She proved that the universe operates on principles we can understand through observation and mathematics. That matter is not fixed but dynamic. That energy emerges from atomic structure. That women can discover these truths as effectively as men. These principles won't decay, won't transform into something else after sufficient time. They're as permanent as scientific knowledge gets in a universe where even atoms die. Marie Curie discovered both truths simultaneously, that atoms change and that truth doesn't, that matter is temporary and that understanding is lasting. In laboratories worldwide, scientists still work with radioactive materials, still follow decay curves, still measure half-lives, still use techniques Marie pioneered over a century ago. The beautiful blue light still glows in experiments she'd recognize, still fascinating, still deadly, still teaching us about atomic structure, one disintegrating nucleus at a time. And in that Parisian crypt, beneath tons of stone, behind lead shielding, Marie Curie rests alongside France's immortals, still radioactive, still dangerous, still glowing with the light she gave her life to understand. Her half-life extends beyond any human measurement, her influence radiating outward through time, touching every generation that seeks to understand the invisible forces governing existence. She discovered that atoms have expiration dates, but some legacies, it seems, last forever.